Hey everybody, 大家好. It's Jake from Skritter, and today I am joined by Olly Richards of StoryLearning.com, previously known as I Will Teach You a Language. You have probably seen him. He has a brilliant YouTube channel. You have podcasts. You have what, 30 some books? You've been doing it all?
Something like that. We've been busy. That's where the bags and the eyes come from. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the channel today and being willing to talk to me. I've been talking to, obviously I've heard of you, seen you. I know that you've used Skritter a long time, and we actually just got done chatting about Skritter over for your channel. But today I want to talk to you about stories. Now I want to talk about the power of stories. I want to talk about some of your experiences learning Chinese and Japanese. I mean, obviously that's what we focus on here. How are you? Can you tell us a little bit about what story learning is and how did you get involved? How did you get started learning language?
I'll answer the questions in that order. So story learning is basically a method that I've developed where you can learn languages through stories. And I have a catchphrase I like to use, which is, with story learning, you learn languages through stories, not rules, which is, a little bit trite, but it kind of makes the point that it's not traditional language learning. I'm a big believer in comprehensible input and the power of immersion. And so what I try and do with story learning is I try and make that easy by creating courses, by writing books that you might have seen like these all around. And so it's a combination of creating the materials that are available to make it easy to learn through immersion, and also the tuition. But I obviously didn't start this way. It's something more recent that I've developed. But I started learning languages when I was about 19. So I grew up with no language background at all. But when I was 19, basically what happened was my girlfriend at the time broke up with me, and that sent me into this massive tailspin. And I actually ran away to Paris. I got a one-way ticket on the Eurostar from London to Paris. Went and lived in Paris for 6 months. Tried to learn French, did quite well, and then kind of got a lot of confidence that I could learn another language. And then so I went on to learn 7 more languages after that. So I've learned Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Cantonese, Arabic, Italian. I'm losing track, and then smatterings of a few other languages like Thai and German here and there. But during the process, I've obviously tried lots of different ways of learning languages, and the thing that I came back to over and over again is by far the most important part of the language learning process is lots and lots of input. And the idea being that if you can flood your brain with the language and you can learn to understand and get this passive knowledge, it then becomes a lot easier to develop active speaking knowledge after that. And so that's where the story learning kind of ethos comes from.
So in there, in terms of Japanese and Cantonese, Mandarin, no?
No, I don't. I have never learned Mandarin.
You picked the harder of the two, kind of.
I know. People keep telling me this.
Dialects of Chinese.
Yeah, it's especially resource-wise, because there's absolutely nothing out there. But yeah, it was an interesting one.
It's quite interesting, actually. Speaking of Cantonese, Mandarin, I don't know if you have encountered this, but so my wife is originally from Hong Kong, and so her parents speak Cantonese, and I speak really bad Cantonese. But being in the game for a while, context is really key. But I have found where the coolest thing about kind of characters and everything, we can communicate by just writing, and we don't need to speak. So sometimes if we run into this weird thing where it's just, okay, we're going to write it down, and that's going to be the way that we oh, that's what you're saying, which is super bizarre to me sometimes, and a lot of fun. So story learning, I think it's a good concept. And actually I was poking around yesterday in prep, and I've been wanting to do a Japanese challenge for a while. And I actually think that using your story method I want to try it. I want to be a beginner, and I'm very much in the camp of immersion and just jumping in and comprehensible input and all these different things. And so for you, did you use your method when learning Japanese and when learning Cantonese, or was this something that you kind of developed afterward? When did story learning come into reality for you in this journey of learning 8 languages?
Yeah, good question. So story learning, I was I'm talking on a podcast just this morning with a friend about that, about how as educators, what we're generally doing is kind of consolidating knowledge into, in a way, a kind of packaged format, because real life is messy, as we all know, right? No one ever learns a language following one sort of specific method without deviating. So story learning, what it's become, and what I really try to do with stories is to or with the method is to try to make it approachable for beginners. I'm very much kind of focused on the majority of people who really want to learn a language but haven't got on with traditional methods in the past.
Mm-hmm.
One of the kind of logical consequences of story learning is that once you get to a kind of upper intermediate level, you really should be reading native level content in the language anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it has an expiry date, I think. But I'm really focused on actually giving people who are at a beginner level or an intermediate level a way to learn through that process. So, and because it's quite a structured process, I didn't learn that way myself. I had to kind of construct it through my various experiences. But the way I first discovered the power of stories was when I was actually in Argentina. And this was back in 2003, I think, either 2003, 2004. And I was traveling through the mountains in the border of Argentina and Bolivia. An amazing place, very, very high up in the mountains, this little village called Irusha. And it was really, really high up. It's like the point where the oxygen starts to thin out a little bit. And so I had a wonderful night, like out in this little village, drinking Malbec and eating steak with some friends. And I went to bed that night, and then I woke up about 3 a.m. and I couldn't breathe because of the altitude, and I was kind of heaving for air. And I couldn't breathe. So I ended up getting up and walking out onto the balcony of this little hostel place that we were staying at. And I was looking out over this huge valley in the mountains. It was really it was a full moon as well. It was properly haunting, and I couldn't breathe. So I remember thinking, like, this could be it right here. Eventually, the breath came back, obviously, which is why I'm here today. Mm-hmm. But it was a really scary moment. And after that passed, I was too scared to go back to bed, and it was 3 a.m. But we didn't have cell phones back then, right? The only thing I had was a book in Spanish called Crónica de una muerte anunciada by Garcia Marquez that I bought in a market a few days before, hadn't opened it. So I sat down, picked up the book, too scared to go back to bed, and I just started reading. My Spanish wasn't very good at the time, so I struggled to understand. I just kind of plodded through because I just couldn't go back to bed, didn't have anything else to do. So I must have read like a quarter of the book, sat up for a good couple of hours. Now the next day, as I was walking through the village with my friends, I noticed that there were these kind of words popping into my head. There were these strange words like el obispo, which means the bishop, which is a word I'd never learned anywhere else, but it's from the story, right? And so I realized that from all that reading I'd done, that all these words were kind of popping into my head in a very strange way, because normally I had to work very hard to memorize words. But then here I was just having all these words come back to me out of nothing. And so I realized, well, it's because of the story that I was reading. So over the following weeks, I finished that book, I read more and more books, just reading. And then when I eventually circled back down south and got to Buenos Aires, met up with some friends, I realized that over the course of those few weeks, my Spanish had been absolutely transformed. I could understand so much more of what people were saying, but my spoken fluency was also a lot better because I just had these words that were kind of available that weren't there before. Mm-hmm. And so it was a real kind of epiphany moment when I realized, like, all this traditional study I'd been doing before had got me, somewhere. But it wasn't until I started reading that things really just exploded, because I had just like access to just infinite amounts of knowledge in the language. And so that was the point there when I began to just really focus a lot more on input. I tried to apply that to other languages as I started learning other languages. But the problem is, when you're a beginner, it's difficult to get that material at the level you need, and that's something I try to address now in the method. And so it was over the course of a few years that I tried to really figure out how to integrate, how to take the concept of reading and stories and how to make that into something that's suitable for beginners to do as well. So I began kind of by writing these books of short stories, which we've got in lots of different languages, which are kind of for false beginners. But then it took a lot more thinking and planning and structuring and experimentation to actually figure out, okay, how do we turn that into a beginner course like the Japanese one that you were looking at? So it's a long process.
Yeah, no, and it sounds like it, but it does, like the things that jump out to me thinking about your story there is, right, that you have that input. There's that aha, sometimes there's these aha moments, but like you are getting mass exposure and something that you're actually interested in, which like sometimes like textbooks cannot really do necessarily. But the thing that I love to hear about your process with the book is, like you said, specifically, like you just kind of slugged through it. You didn't know everything and you didn't care, right? Like, and maybe you don't have a dictionary in front of you, or maybe you do, but like regardless,
no dictionary.
Just work, right. Like, and it is quite remarkable to, especially when you kind of get to the point where you're comfortable with this, but like that sweet spot of comprehensible input, right, is so critical, of where you can understand most of it, or you can make an educated guess on the context or whatever it is. And then you kind of just fill in the blanks, or you just let it, it's okay. And like, I've done this with Chinese books before, and it's like, it's kind of amazing to just, hey, I'm not going to look anything up. And you know what? At the end of that, you can still tell someone about what you probably read if you know enough of it. And that is finding that sweet spot. So setting that up for beginners, as you said, is really difficult. So how do you, with your Mandarin program, I think right now with your Mandarin program, you have an intermediate, correct me if I'm wrong, but and right. You're working on a beginner.
Yeah, we have the beginner Chinese Uncovered coming in autumn this year.
Okay.
And then we have a number of intermediate level Mandarin programs. Yeah.
Yep. And so, but you do have the Japanese one. So on the Japanese side of things, with this power of story, and so like for me, and I'm sure it's going to be similar for Chinese, because we have one of the similar struggles, which is so like Japanese and Chinese we don't have the ABCs, right? So how do you handle that inside of your stuff? Like, at what point do you force people in Japanese to start interacting with Romaji, katakana,
with the characters? Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
And
the hiragana. So like, it's not just Romaji, correct?
Oh, correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this was one of the things that we kind of deliberated most on in the creation process of the course. We've had to do this with all. See, every language is a bit different, right? So languages like Romance languages have the Latin alphabet. Languages like Russian, we have a Russian course in the works as well. The alphabet's relatively easy; you can pick it up quite quickly. Languages like Chinese and Japanese, not so. So So we deliberated a lot about how to handle this. So we worked off a few principles, right? Principle number one is that we know that we want you to be reading stories from the beginning. That's the cornerstone of the method. We want to get you over the hump of like resisting reading because it's too hard. We want you to be reading from the beginning so that you start to get the benefits of that immersion. Mm-hmm. We also want you to learn to read in the language with the script, because that's also essential. Mm-hmm. And so rather than taking a kind of sequential approach, which I think in an ideal world makes sense, whereby you kind of learn to read first and then you move on to reading, that's not an option for us, because we want you to read from the start. So what we do is we bite the bullet and we say, right, you are going to be reading a story from day one, because that's the cornerstone of how the method works. Mm-hmm. In Japanese, but you're going to be using Romaji, so you're going to be using the romanization to read the story. It comes with audio, obviously, so that you're actually listening to the sounds of it.
And you play native at speed audio, and you give the slow. Absolutely. But I do like, you're like, dude, just get over it, which I appreciated.
Yeah. And this is always the big hump with all of the courses. It's like you're going to be reading and listening to full speed audio from the start. Yeah, so you better get used to it. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to do this, that's fine. Lots of other courses out there. But if you want to really get to grips with the language from the beginning, that's what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. So with a language like Japanese, there's a compromise that has to be made. We have to use the Romanized script from the beginning so that you can actually follow along. But what we also do is we say, right, you're going to be doing this, which is not ideal, really. But while you're doing that, we're going to be teaching you how to read hiragana. And we take, so over the course of the first 10 modules of the course, you're reading the story in the Roman script, but you're also learning to read and write hiragana. Mm-hmm. And so by the time you get to the halfway point of the course, module 10, then what happens is we flip the script. So you are now getting the stories not in Romaji, but you're getting it in hiragana. So you start to read. You continue reading the story as you have been, but you do it now in the Japanese script, so that you start to push yourself on that next level. Cool. And we give you the Roman script as well, so that it's there in case you need it.
Yeah, it's a good reference. But I do, like, you'll probably agree with me, if you can challenge yourself, like, always important if you can to challenge yourself and like hide it, turn it off, whatever, right? Absolutely. Peek at it if you need to, but like, don't use it as a crutch forever. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to get away from it.
it's all about. I think language learning is all about understanding your limits and then just pushing yourself
Yeah.
that little bit more.
That little N+1.
Life is like that, isn't it? It's all
Mm-hmm.
about just, great things lie just outside on the other side of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
The challenge for us is that by having these self-study courses, we're not able to kind of work one-to-one in the way that a teacher would. So
Right.
we try to apply the methodology that makes the most sense while giving options to students so that they can take some agency over the process.
No, I mean, I think that really makes sense. And I think, one of the things that kind of piqued my interest about all the stuff that you've been working on and everything, and, working with some people on your team, is really excited to get to the point. And for myself personally, like, have been wanting to almost learn Japanese before starting to learn Chinese. So like, this has been like something that's been
a long time coming.
It's a long time coming.
Yeah.
But also just that, finding this, if the material is not good in the beginning, it can be very easy to lose interest, right? So this idea of graded readers, this idea of having these stories, something that you can engage with, something that's a little bit more fun and exciting, little drama, you can listen to it, you can tell your friends about it, you can kind of get into it a little bit more. That's going to be so much more. I mean, how many times are we going to go through the, ni hao, ni jiao shima means? Like, it's like, hello, who are you? I'm American and you are, like, come on. Let's bring a little bit of drama, because that doesn't happen in real life. And I think for your story in Japanese, we're starting at the airport. There's an airport pickup, like they're at Narita Airport. And like, it's really funny because I have only listened to the audio like kind of once, and I saw your prep and everything and was looking through it. But like, I knew, at least I was able to pick up, like, okay, I know the context of the airport, and I'm pretty sure I heard the word Narita in there. And I was like, that's about it that I learned, that I could understand from the 2 minutes. But it's like, I really look forward to digging into that. And I do think that, I think there's kind of a wicked combo here between story learning, what you guys are doing, and Skritter, because we can kind of, especially if we can get this right, but like regardless, this idea of like, we're going to accelerate and boost that retention and the writing, the recognition skills. You start combining that with context that you're interested in and guided lessons over on that end. And like, that is a very quick way, I think, to accelerate in Chinese and Japanese specifically, because we have to address the fact that there are scripts that we're not familiar with, right? So how do we do that? And like, Skritter does that really well. And I think that the fact that you have, again, this context, just makes it really fun and exciting. So
well, everything's,
I want to dig into it more, man.
Yeah, I mean, everything is improved by context, right? Because nothing happens in a vacuum. I think when people burn out with language learning, it's because you're just existing in the world of the abstract.
Sure.
Whereas the great thing about stories is that they have the potential to give you two things, two cornerstones of language learning, which is comprehensible input if it's done well, and this is the concept of the graded reader. Like, so the story in the Japanese course you mentioned is pitched for complete beginners.
Yep.
It's comprehensible, which is something that people don't understand at first, but yeah, you get it in the courses themselves. We do it in a very careful way. They're comprehensible, but they're also compelling, meaning that it's something that you really want to understand what's going on. And so when it's something that's comprehensible, you can understand it, and compelling, you need to read it. Then you're at a point where all the different faculties of your brain are engaged, and you're engaged in a kind of holistic way, which means that you're going to find it so much easier to learn characters, for example, because you're so much more invested on the whole. And when we're invested in stuff, retention goes up, your memory improves, you take more of an interest. So it really is, building this kind of holistic model for language learning is it's the way forward. The
list that you're studying, say inside of Skritter or whatever, or there is context behind it. The people that are talking about this stuff. You're familiar with the characters, familiar with where these things occurred, and then the really cool thing is, at some point, right, similar to your experience learning Spanish and reading the book, is now outside of that context of the story, you start hearing those things everywhere. And you're like, that word. Yeah. And that of course can happen in textbooks as well, and things like that. But like in the stories, just because of the way that we orate, it happens a lot. Even when we're talking, we throw lots of verbs in there right away, lots of describer. We're just using the language in the way that we as humans have used the language forever. And so it just kind of happens, and then boom, like you said, it's just every single moment you're like, oh yeah, I totally heard that word yesterday, or saw that word yesterday, or whatever it was, and then those moments just deepen that neural network and those connections, and you're just off to the races. How do we, I think, there's going to be a link below in the description for if people want to check this out, a little bit of a discount. We are affiliates of Story Learning as a program. If we want to check out more of your stuff, like where do you talk about language learning apart from your website? What do you got going on?
So best thing to do, if you're on YouTube, check out my YouTube channel. You can just search for Olly Richards or Story Learning.
We'll have a link below for sure
as well. Mm-hmm. If you want to get stuck into a course, you can go to storylearning.com, where there's courses in lots of different languages, different levels. If you like reading, you can check out my books. They are in fine bookstores everywhere. And if you like podcasts, I have the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, where I've got over 400 episodes now.
Wow! So you've been at that for a while.
Yeah, people call in, they leave questions, I answer people's questions. It's like awesome. Super simple, but I really.
And you cover all languages in general. You go into specifics. Do you use interviews with experts in certain languages, polyglot, like
bit of everything.
Got it all. You got it all.
Bit of everything, yeah.
Sweet.
Bit of everything.
Awesome.
And so come over and say hi.
And you have used Skritter before?
Man, I was deep into Skritter.
Yeah.
In, let me think, 2015, I think, for Japanese.
Did you use it for? Yeah. And did you find? Here's our chance for a user testimonial from someone.
Yeah.
But did it really help you? And you saw the gains and everything? You enjoyed it?
I loved using Skritter, man. I mean, everything from the fact that it's just so well thought through from a user perspective. So everything from just the user interface. I could have just been swiping like all day long because of the way that the yellow lines were kind of light up. I'm not sure what they do now, but just
there's still streaks. We reward you and make you feel good if you're killing it.
Yeah. It was just great fun to use. But everything from that to the fact that you have or at least you used to have all these different well-known textbooks that were kind of preloaded word lists in there that I could just access whatever I was
still studying. Got it. We have even more these days, and we're soon, as I said, like I'm going to figure out a way to, I know there's going to be a solution for us to figure out how to get some of your stories inside of Skritter, both for Japanese on the beginner level and also for Chinese on the intermediate level. And then very obviously excited for the unconventional
Chinese uncovered.
Chinese uncovered.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm getting, there are so many names out there in the world, but so Chinese uncovered, when that beginner series launches as well, we're hoping to find a way that we can, have some of that stuff in there as well. And then not only can you unlock language through the power of story, but you can unlock characters through the power of Skritter and combine them together. And, you can listen to your story, you can read your story. And then if you're struggling, we will help you out on that process. So, well, it has been fantastic to talk with you. Is there anything else that you want to say here at the end?
No, man, just thanks everyone for listening. Come and join me on my YouTube channel. I've got lots more stuff coming out about stories there. So I look forward to seeing you there. Leave me a comment. I'll get back to everybody that I can. And,
cool.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure to talk to you. And like I said, I look forward to figuring out a way that we can kind of link things up even more in the future. So
we'll make it happen.
Yeah, as always, one of my favorite ways to end on Skritter with anything I'm talking about is, 谢谢大家 and stay tuned. So we look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Okay.
Thanks so much. Good to talk.
Bye-bye.